In this age of manufactured terror, one of the most vital regions on the global chessboard is also an area that few in the West know anything about: Central Asia. This geostrategic and resource-rich area on the doorstep of China and Russia finds itself in the middle of an all-out terror campaign. But, as key national intelligence whistleblowers are pointing out, these terrorists are working hand in glove with Nato. This is the GRTV Backgrounder on Global Research TV. Ever since the staged false flag attacks of 9/11, the US government and its complicit corporate media have focused their attention on fighting the shadowy, all-pervasive, all-powerful, ill-defined, and undefeatable Al-Qaeda enemy that is supposedly menacing the US and its allies at home and abroad. The term Al-Qaeda, of course, is merely a cipher for excuse to invade. In the case of Afghanistan, for instance, the US used the threat of Al-Qaeda as the excuse for their 12-year-long invasion and occupation of the country. In Libya and Syria, the US and its allies are supporting those same self-described Al-Qaeda-affiliated fighters. The ruse has long since become obvious. Less obvious, then, because it has been taking place completely under the radar of mainstream media attention, is another front in the so-called war on terror: Central Asia and the Caucasus region. Encompassing the area surrounding the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, this region has long been identified as perhaps the most geostrategically vital part of the globe. It provides access to the exceptionally rich Caspian oil and gas deposits, hosts the New Silk Road, a vital trade route between China and Europe, and sits on the doorstep of China and Russia. And it just so happens to have a terrorist problem.
A gunfight in the courtyard of a Kazan apartment block. Two hardline Islamist militants and one police officer died in this operation last month in what is supposed to be a peaceful republic in central Russia. In July, two attacks left Tatарstan's most senior government-supported Muslim cleric in hospital and his deputy dead.
Late Thursday night, a car that was stopped at a police checkpoint in the Russian Republic of Dagestan, in fact the capital, Makhachkala, detonated itself. And then in the ensuing chaos, as emergency crews and firefighters came to fight the blaze that ensued, a second bomb went off about 20 minutes later. It is believed that bomb could have been hidden in a parked car near the same checkpoint. And this is not new to the area. In fact, this is an ongoing battle in the Russian Caucasus. The region has been suffering attacks by Islamist terrorist groups, international cells that Russian officials have linked to groups like Al-Qaeda.
And over in Kyrgyzstan, the security service says that two terrorist organizations, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan and the Islamic Jihad Union, directly plotted and participated in the ethnic violence in the country's southern cities of Osh and Jalalabad. Officials add that supporters and the relatives of the ousted president Kurmanbek Bakiyev allegedly promised to provide $30 million to those organizations, saying that the results of the investigation have been confirmed by the concerned countries.
At first blush, it may seem odd that in this age of terror, the American population has been told so little about the growing terrorist insurgency in Central Asia and the Caucasus. But when examined in the light of regional geopolitics, this deafening silence makes perfect sense. Indications of how and why this region is so important come from numerous geostrategists, including Zbigniew Brzezinski, Obama's acknowledged mentor and a key advisor to his administration. In his 1997 book, The Grand Chessboard, Brzezinski identified the Central Asian Caucasus region as part of a larger area he called the Eurasian Balkans. This area, he wrote, is of importance from the standpoint of security and historical ambitions to at least three of their most immediate and more powerful neighbors, namely Russia, Turkey, and Iran, with China also signaling an increasing political interest in the region. But, he continued, the Eurasian Balkans are infinitely more important as a potential economic prize. An enormous concentration of natural gas and oil reserves is located in the region, in addition to important minerals, including gold. Brzezinski knew very well what he was writing about. As National Security Advisor under President Carter, he had overseen Operation Cyclone, the US government's since declassified plan to arm, train, and fund Islamic radicals in Pakistan and Afghanistan to draw the Soviet Union into a protracted war in the region. This, famously, led to the foundation of what became known as Al-Qaeda in the 1980s, a point that Brzezinski has since admitted and even bragged about, claiming that the creation of a few stirred-up Muslims helped to bring down the Soviet Union. It is no surprise, then, that Brzezinski went on to predict in his 1997 book that the first major war of the 21st century would take place in this region, which is exactly what happened with the NATO invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. And it is also no surprise that even NATO's hand-picked Afghan president, Hamid Karzai, is now openly accusing the US of supporting the Taliban in the country to convince the public that they will need US protection after the planned troop withdrawal date in 2014.
Further muddying Hagel's visit, Karzai accused the United States and the Taliban of holding daily talks and having a mutual interest in destabilizing Afghanistan. As an example, he cited yesterday's suicide bombings that killed 19 people. He said, "They are trying to frighten us into thinking that if the foreigners are not in Afghanistan, we would be facing these sort of incidents."
Global research contributor and Stop NATO International director Rick Rozoff appeared on the Boiling Frogs Post podcast in 2011 to discuss this region and the overlap between NATO's strategic interests and Islamic extremism. This overlap can be seen in numerous specific stories, but perhaps the most striking relates to the terrorism that has been taking place on Russia's doorstep in Chechnya since the 1990s.
Both Brzezinski and Wolfowitz Libby & Company pointed out that the main area where any sort of competition could ever arise, understand, we're not talking about threat, we're not talking about anyone who would even seriously challenge, but perhaps might offer some modicum of resistance to plans for the United States and its NATO allies to maintain this unprecedented global dominance, that this would occur in the former Soviet Union. And what Sibel was referring to, or yourself perhaps, Peter, is a Commonwealth of Independent States. It was formed after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. Mm-hmm. These are 12 of the 15 former Soviet republics, excluding the 3 Baltic states. And it's been the intent since the mid-1990s to undermine even that. You know, it's basically a loose trade association more than anything, or economic association. But the United States and other Western leaders set up an alliance known by the acronym of GUAM. That's Georgia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, and Moldova. For a short while, there were 2 U's in Guam, the second one being Uzbekistan. Mm-hmm. Which subsequently withdrew. And now the European Union has come up with an equivalent, what's called the Eastern Partnership, which is to increasingly wean all the non-Central Asian former Soviet republics away from the Commonwealth of Independent States and towards the European Union, which is, in terms of foreign policy and certainly military policy, indistinguishable from NATO. And those countries I'm talking about, of course, are Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and who am I leaving out? Armenia. So, I mean, there's every attempt to isolate Russia, to destroy even the residual components of the former Soviet Union.
It has long been understood that the terror operations in Chechnya and other key parts of the Central Asia and Caucasus region have been supported, funded, and protected by NATO to help destabilize the region surrounding their main geopolitical rivals, Russia and China, in an operation very similar to Operation Cyclone in the 70s and 80s. This has, until now, remained mostly within the realm of speculation, but in a recent groundbreaking series of interviews on the Corbett Report, FBI whistleblower Sibel Edmonds has confirmed that this is, in fact, exactly what is happening.
And with NATO, and this is extremely important for people who really want to understand this. And again, we are looking at a small percentage of people who see the extreme importance of these points we've been discussing, is the correlation when we're talking about taking these nations and make them official NATO members, Azerbaijan, okay? And you and I have discussed this, and they went from spending something like $30-40 million on their defense to today $4-5 billion that they have to give the United States, which is actually a lot of it is our money given to them as aid, and then comes back here, the same our money, and then buys it from Northrop Grumman or General Dynamics or whatever. But then you're looking at not official members, but partner members and all the offices that NATO has been opening. Where? United Emirates. I mean, North Atlantic, okay, NATO. What was the purpose of NATO when it was established, around World War II, okay? What was the region? I mean, if there were some specifics, all those today are irrelevant. It's moot. NATO should have been dissolved if that was what their mission. I mean, that was what the front said for NATO in 1989, 1990, after the Berlin Wall, after the Soviet Union's collapse. And as neocons and even neoliberals hero Francis Fukuyama said, the endism, it is it, finished. Now we're going to be one global, one happy world. Everybody loves everybody, and the end of old wars. And NATO should have been dissolved. NATO has been expanding. Okay, so you have all these countries such as Azerbaijan. They are looking at Kazakhstan. They conceive Kazakhstan to become a very, very important strategic member of NATO. Again, look at the location, Kazakhstan, then turn around, look at, China, So it's those, but then all these offices we have been putting in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and all these different countries, the little nations within the United Emirates, and say, I mean, what is going on here? And that goes back to what we have been talking about since the beginning, the Plan B. And when you're looking at the Islamization of Central Asia, Caucasus, and using Islam by NATO for carrying some of these operations and bringing these states within their sphere of influence, while you are looking at some of the helpers, partners they have had, which has come from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Emirates. And then again, you look at some of the partnerships that's being established between those nations and some of the Central Asian and Caucasus. And I have been again covering those within my nightly news episodes. And that is, okay, here is Saudi Arabia, $200 million agreement with Azerbaijan on this project. You gotta really keep a close eye on that. I mean, really look at it and analyze it. You don't have to even spend hours. Once you do it for a while, then all you have to do is see the headlines, read the first paragraph, and you know how this links to everything else we have been talking about.
If it is true that the people perish for lack of knowledge, perhaps it is nowhere more true than in the phony, NATO-created war of terror. Without the understanding provided by Edmonds and others in identifying the Central Asia-Caucasus terror campaign as a NATO proxy war, the entire concept of Islamic terrorism becomes inscrutable to geopolitical analysis. As this information will never be disseminated by the complicit corporate media, it is vitally important that the people take this task into their own hands by sharing this information with others and contributing to the analysis of the terror campaign being waged in the region. The seeds of the next great world conflict are being sowed in Central Asia, on the doorstep of Russia and China. And regardless of whether or not this conflict too is being manipulated and managed behind the scenes, the lives of countless millions hang in the balance of the specter of that all-out war. Only an understanding of NATO's active complicity in fostering and protecting these Muslim extremists can help break the tool of propaganda by which they will try to convince their populations to acquiesce to such a war. For more on this story and other breaking news and current events, please go to globalresearch.ca. For more research and analysis by James Corbett, please go to corbettreport.com.